Today we're going to walk through the assembly of the Adler 969 Pure sewing machine. Let's go over the parts included with your machine: a belt for the flywheel, chain, and S-hooks for the foot lift mechanism, along with a baggie of some miscellaneous motor stuff. You have the thread spool holder and a thread guide at the top, thread post, and you have the operating instructions for your machine, along with just another miscellaneous paper. Two brackets that are not used with the motor setup how it is with the servo motor, an anchor for your machine, some bobbins, a serial number paper for your machine. Hang on to that. You get a pack of needles with the machine, a 1000H needle system, some needle shims, extra zip ties, oil and an oil container, a cap that's not necessarily used, miscellaneous springs for tension. These are just extra parts for now. 2mm Allen wrench, mounting bolts for your machine, guard spacers, screws, and some wood screws. This is a ferrule for your foot lift. It's really critical that you hang on to that. It's actually used in the foot lift mechanism. This is your foot lift mechanism and then a needle position motor bracket. The bracket is not used in this case. And then you also have some miscellaneous thread guide stuff, along with the guard itself, the belt guard, the triangle on the end, and then some foam pieces for your thread stand. Next, we'll look at the tools needed to set everything up: Phillips and flathead screwdriver, a drill or an impact wrench as an alternative, some open-end wrenches and crescent wrenches. You can actually do this whole setup without that. The set of metric Allen wrenches, a cutter, needle nose, or vice grip pliers work fine. Next, we'll move on to mounting the machine. Once you have the machine on top of the stand, the first thing you'll need to do is mount it with the 4 mounting bolts with the washers. Keep in mind that 2 are longer and 2 are shorter. The long ones go in the back and the short ones go in the front. One key thing to mention is please be sure to have the machine on the stand when you loosen the thumb screws. There is a 250-pound shock inside of the metal tube that will come up if there is no machine attached. It's pretty strong, and you really need the machine to counterweight everything. Next, we'll install the foot lift mechanism. There should be 4 pre-drilled holes on the bottom side of your tabletop to make mounting easier with the 4 wood screws that are included. Install the foot lift mechanism with the lever hanging out over the pedals. You can use a drill to finish tightening them down once you have them installed. Now it's time to connect the chain and S-hooks from the foot lift mechanism to the foot lift pedal. Install 1 S-hook on each end, 1 at the foot lift, and then 1 on the foot pedal itself, and then attach the chain so that the pedal is in an upward position. Earlier I mentioned about the 250-pound shock inside the metal tube. These are the thumb screws I was referring to. The stand is adjustable. The linkage between or for the motor is also affected by this, so make sure, I didn't in this application, but make sure that you loosen the thumb screw on the linkage for the motor as well. But this just makes your life a lot easier when it comes to moving the machine. Now it's time to run the foot lift cable and install the belt guard. First thing that I do is mark on the flywheel to be able to line the flywheel up again once I remove the bolts. This can be done with a Sharpie. Use an Allen wrench to remove all the bolts holding the flywheel on there. The reason for the mark is just for quick reference. There is really only one way that flywheel can get on there, so you can't really mess it up, but I always like to put the mark on there for quick reference. Once the bolts are removed, you can take the flywheel off and set it aside. Next, remove the zip ties holding the foot lift cable in place. Once you've done this, you're going to want to feed it down through the inside of the machine Be careful not to have it rub against any moving parts. An example, that belt pulley that you can see there in the video. Make sure you run it behind that shaft on the inside of the machine, and then run it down through the inside, because the belt guard won't necessarily fit on there if it's not ran properly, or if it's hitting something, you are gonna notice it in the future. Once it's down through there, then run it through the hole in the table and leave it there for now. Next, we're gonna install the belt guard on the face of the machine, or on the inside. Use the short screws for the ones at the top, and then put them in finger tight to kind of hold it into place for the time being. You can go back over and cinch them down once you've installed them. Then the rest of the screw holes, or the way that they fasten, is by the spacers. These again go in tight, finger tight for now, and then go back over and cinch them down once you've completed that. Next, you can grab your belts and we can install that. Once you have your belt unwound, grab your flywheel, put your belt in the groove of the flywheel, and you can actually put it back on and install it. Notice the mark. It just makes it easier to line everything up. Like I said, there is only one way to put that flywheel back on there, but the mark definitely helps. Then go ahead and hand tighten or hand start them, and then you can go back over them with an Allen wrench once you have that completed. Next, you're going to want to tilt the machine back into this position. It'll rest backwards like that by itself without any issues. And then reach underneath to the bottom of your machine and hang the belt over the small pulley of the speed reducer. And go ahead and tilt the machine back and then check the fitment and tension of it. If you need to adjust the speed reducer, you can from that standpoint. And then next is going to be the outside belt guard. The outside belt guard, in order for you to install it, you need to tilt the machine back and install it that way. It can be a little bit tricky for fitment, but it should line up with all the spacers in there as well. Make sure that you first finger tighten everything and check for fitment first before you actually cinch everything down, because that can be a little bit tricky. Once you have that all done, then you can go ahead and tilt the machine back and have it in the sitting resting position upright. The last part of the belt guard is the little triangular piece in the back. Now, I've already pre-drilled these holes, but just check for fitment. It's not a very snug fit, but it just goes around there, so you can't necessarily get your fingers in there. Mark each holes. These you'll have to drill yourself. These are not pre-drilled in there. I'm not sure if I have drilled them already or not, but in this application, you'll have to drill your own holes and check for fitment. But make sure that you can get those in there and then go back through and put the wood screws in, and you should be set with the guard. Now we'll install the foot lift cable. The furl that I'm showing here is pretty important as it holds the loom in place. Slide that furl, or slide the cable rather, through the furl and have it rest back on the loom. You can see in my left hand there where it is, and then feed the cable through the hole in the back of the foot lift mechanism, and then also through the tube that it goes through. What this does, the last tube that it goes through will actually tighten a screw against the cable. Once you have the cable fed through, go ahead and grab a pliers, either a vice grip or just a simple pliers. I like using a vice grip just because it holds a little bit better, or you can have a friend help you do this too. Pull the cable tight and then use an Allen wrench to tighten the set screw against the cable. Once that's done, you can go ahead and just fasten the loom underneath the table so it's out of the way. Next, we'll install the thread stand. Grab the hardware, 2 nuts, 2 washers. That just gets fastened into all the way, or threaded all the way up, and then a washer through the hole, then a washer and a nut on the bottom end. Once you've hand tightened them in there, you can actually go through with a wrench, open end, or a crescent wrench to tighten it down once you have that completed. Then we can fasten the 2 poles together with the coupler. This is just threaded in there. Go ahead and tighten that down, and then install the top thread guide, or the top post on there as well after the fact. Next, you're gonna want to grab the spool holder. You may need to loosen these up a little bit in order for them to slide down through there properly, but install the spool holder first, and then tighten that down with a Phillips head screwdriver. Then we're going to move on to the top thread guide as well. Again, these come a little bit tight, and they may be a little difficult, so I always loosen them a little bit before I actually install them. Once you have that installed, keep in mind the rings go down through that just to help the thread pass through a little bit easier. Next thing is the foam pads go into the spool holder, and then the cones slide over those to hold the foam down. And then the last thing to install is the little helicopter looking things. Those actually hold your thread in place from moving. Once you have that completed, you are ready to go ahead and put spools of thread on there, and then we'll work towards the threading process. One key thing is to make sure your thread travels up before it goes to the machine. This just allows your thread to come off the spool properly. Your thread spool is actually not supposed to spin at all. It's supposed to come up before it goes to the machine. But go ahead and grab the existing thread that should be tied to your machine and maybe looped around that thread tension a couple times. Tie a knot in the 2 threads, and then use your foot lift lever to release the tension and actually just pull that thread all the way through. If you don't release the tension, it's a lot harder to pull the thread through as it is. And the tension is released by the foot lift mechanism itself or the manual lever on top of the machine. After you pulled your thread through, cut it and then feed it through the top of the bottom of the needle bar there, and then we are ready to go through the needle. Always remember, when you go through the needle, go from left to right. Moving along here to some functions. This is the stitch length knob. Higher the number, the further distance your stitch length is. This is back stitch lever. If you want to go backwards, you hold that down. Next is the oil reservoir. You get a tube to fill the rest of the way up, and then an oil can to actually add extra to it as well. I would advise to put that into the can before you attempt to put it in the machine. Next is an oil reservoir at the top of your machine. This is lubricating your needle bar, so it's always a good idea to put oil in there periodically. What I'm turning here in the video is a foot pressure adjustment. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. Right puts more pressure on it, left loosens it up. Now we'll talk about this knob at the top with the numbers on it. This knob adjusts how high the foot steps. So obviously the higher the number, the higher your foot is going to step. Moving on to the tension discs, this knob or this lever here will completely eliminate and hold open that top tension. The other tension discs, the way they work is you have a plus and minus on them. Minus applies less tension, plus applies more tension. And use this when you're trying to get your stitching correct. Moving right along to taking the needle out, 2mm Allen wrench that's included. Loosen the 2 screws on that needle system there. And in this case, the needle fell right out. But what I'm pointing out here in the video is the scarf of the needle. Always make sure that that scarf is pointing towards the flywheel of the machine when you reinstall it. The other thing is to make sure that it is up as high as possible before you tighten those screws down. Key thing is, don't over tighten those set screws. They do wear out periodically and they are meant to strip if they are over tightened. Now we'll move on to the shuttle portion of the machine. You may not need to rotate your machine. It can be done at any point in time. It's just easier in some cases, but there's a spring that holds your bobbin case in place. When that spring is released, you can remove the bobbin. Once you have a new bobbin filled, you can put it back in there and pull the thread through the groove and over the tension plate like that. Now we're going to talk about the needle spacers that go in here. The 2 screws that I'm removing right now are what holds the needle deflector on, which is that sickle looking thing on your machine. Once you remove those 2 screws, there's a spacer in behind that piece that holds the needle and needs to correspond with the same needle size that you're using. An example, a 230 uses a 230 spacer, 230 needle, 230 spacer, 200 needle, 200 spacer, and so on. But behind this is, like I said, a spacer, just a plastic piece. I'll show a photo of what those look like. They're just plastic and they have a number stamped on them. And again, what the purpose of this needle spacer is to hold your needle in position from getting pushed out away from the shuttle. So it's really important to have those be the same size. And here's a photo of what all the needle spacers look like that come with your machine. Once you have the correct needle spacer picked out for your machine, it's time to go ahead and put it back in and install everything. Moving along to the needle system, this is that 1000 needle system that I was talking about. This does require a special tool to take out and replace, but a 1000 needle system is essentially just a longer needle. This knob, tension knob, is just an extra added tension assembly for your machine. Underneath, when you tilt the machine back, you'll find some distance rings. What these do, these are unused for the time being, but they can stay underneath the machine stored there until you actually need them. What they are used for is to bring the shuttle closer to the needle in some cases. Now we'll move on to winding a bobbin. You should have a wound bobbin that comes with your machine, but in this case we will start fresh on a bobbin itself. So keep in mind how the bobbin was wound around that tension disc that I actually just pulled the thread from. Take your new thread, put it in through the hole, and then wrap it around the tension discs, ensuring that it goes in through there properly. So that's actually holding tension on there. Once you have it put through that little bar there, you can, there's a cool little cutter on the machine that you can actually pinch your thread into, and it will hold the thread in place for when you start winding your bobbin. Once you have the thread in place, grab your bobbin. Keep in mind the hole that is on the one side of your bobbin. That hole, there's a spot on your machine that actually you can put that into, and it will hold your bobbin in place. Once you have that, then you can engage your bobbin winder by moving that lever over, and you can start winding your bobbin as it sews. Now we'll move on to picking up the thread out of the bobbin. If you hang on to the thread from the top with your foot raised, well, actually you'll be able to pull the bobbin thread up from the bottom and have it resting underneath the foot and above the feed dog, the bottom thread above the feed dog. And you can put your piece of leather in there and drop your foot down, and essentially by then you are ready to sew. Hang on to the two threads and you can start sewing exactly like that. One key thing to remember is when you go to pull out your leather once you're done sewing, it's a key thing to make sure that you press your foot lift to extend your foot all the way up, and that your take-up arm is in the highest position it can be. This will release all the tension and ensure that your leather will be able to pull out easily without any issues. One final note is to say thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. We really appreciate you watching it, and we really hope that you enjoy your sewing machine. If you do have any questions or comments, please drop them in the comments below or reach out to the Weaver Leather Machinery team.